Hi there, my name is Katie Bartz from SewingScene.com, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Inkscape Extreme Beginning Tutorials. In today's tutorial, we'll show you how to create text around a circle, as well as convert that into an embroidered patch. Welcome back. Once we have opened Inkscape, we want to go ahead and make sure, if you're following along, that your workspace is set up like mine so we don't run into any issues. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and go to the View menu. Under the View menu, you want to make sure Custom is selected because that will allow us to go ahead and bring up the Properties windows for items that we'll be bringing up shortly. You will also want to go to your Zoom menu and also select Zoom for 1-to-1 so that everything is full screen and it's going to be easier to work with. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the outline of this document that's on the screen. So to do that, we're going to go to the File menu, click on Document Properties. Go ahead and turn off Show Page Border. You can see that that totally turned that sheet of paper in the background off. Also, depending on if you're going to be working with a cutter or if you have a design that you're creating and you're creating a design for one of your embroidery hoops, some of you may be working in millimeters and some of you may be working in inches. So to change that so it's standardized for yourself, you can click on this down arrow here next to Display Units. Today I'm going to go ahead and select inches. Sometimes down the future I may use millimeters since my embroidery hoop uses millimeters, but for today's tutorial, if you're following along, just simply select inches and that will change all the measurements on your screen to be inches as well. And go ahead and close that window. Then on the sub toolbar up here, we want to go ahead and select our strokes properties window, as well as our align and distribute objects properties window. And when you do that, those two windows will pop up here on the side because we've selected custom in our display, our view window, so that it's going to be easier just to pop back and forth and make our changes. All right, so our desktop is set up and ready to go to start working in this tutorial. To start our circle or our text around our circle, we're going to go ahead and select our circle tool. And when we click on it, we will go ahead and hold down our Control and Shift key so that when we click and drag, it will draw out from the center evenly. All right. And when we release, what we'll do is have an outline to our circle. Now, if you don't have an outline, let me go ahead and quickly click on the Select tool right here. If you don't have an outline and you have something filled in, for example, if you have a color filled in your circle, just simply go down here to the palette. And if you click this left, slide all the way to the left, and click the X, what that will do is remove the fill in your object. All right, that will give us a nice path or the curvature to go ahead and place our text on. So once we have our circle, we're going to go ahead and select our text tool. And we're going to go ahead and type some text. So I'm going to go ahead and click, and the cursor is blinking. I'm just going to go ahead and say, I drive fast. And if you like the font that's there, that's great. If you don't, simply highlight that text and come over to your font list and select which text you would like. I'm going to go ahead and use what I was using before. I'm going to choose Franklin Gothic Medium, and I'm going to go ahead and select the Select tool so I'm able to actually move that around. Now, to actually attach text to a path, what you need to do is simply select the text, hold your Shift key down, and select the path, or the circle in this case, the object that you want to attach the text to. So you can see that both items have been selected because they have the marquee around it. Simply go up to the text menu. Under the text menu you have the option Put on Path. So we'll go ahead and select that, and then it's going to go ahead and place that text on the path. Go ahead then next and click to deselect all the objects on the screen, because what we need to try to do is get this text right here to go above on top of the circle. So it says I drive fast across the top. To do that easily, we're not going to manipulate the text, we're actually going to manipulate the circle. So when you select on the circle, and again you select the second time, you will get the rotation tools. You will also see the rotation point here in the center of the circle. So when I rotate the circle, the text is attached to it, and the text is going to actually wrap around the circle. So I'm physically moving the circle, and that text is going with me. So you can see I'm clicking on the rotation handle, and as I drag the circle around, that text where it was attached to is dragging itself around. All right, so let's go ahead and deselect that, because I want to resize my text so it's larger, and I also want to maybe space out the characters a little bit more. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and deal with the text. So I'm going to select on the text itself, and I'm going to select the text tool. And when I do that, I'm able to click and drag all of the text that is here, and I can change the font size by going to the font size drop-down window, and let's change it to 36 at that point. And that actually is probably just a little bit larger for what I want, so let's go to 28. Again, click on the selection tool, and when that is selected, again, I'm going to go ahead and click on the font tool. I could have stayed there where I was. Go ahead and select the text again, and when I select the text, we have the option up here on the toolbar to change the spacing between the letters. So I'm simply going to click on this up arrow, and as I click and just kind of hold it, you will see that those letters get spaced out across the top of that circle, but now they're still not aligned quite right. So let me show you a little tip. If you take your mouse and click and drag down from the ruler at the top of the screen, you will get a grid line that will go across your workspace. That will allow us then to go ahead and select the circle one time. The second time we'll get the rotation handles, and then I can actually click and drag the text and then move this grid mark up to the bottom of the text, and you can see that just barely a little bit of this T here on the right hand side is a little bit lower than this I over here. So I can again select the rotation handles, click and drag my text. So now I can see that the T and the I are perfectly horizontal across the top of that circle. All right. To remove this grid line, hold your mouse pointer over that grid line, and when it turns red, you can see it turns blue and then red. Once it's red, simply select your delete key on your keyboard, and that will remove that grid line that helps you align that text on the top. Now we're almost done with this first part. So we have our circle, we have our text, but this text, when I select it, again, if we look at the bottom of the screen here on the status line, it says that this is text. It is not an object. And for me to go ahead and use this in any cutting software or embroidery digitizing software, I need to have this be an object. So to change it to an object, what you're going to do is go to the Path menu, select Object to Path, and then because it's text, we also have to ungroup the text. When I ungroup the text, all the text is individual. And then I'm going to go back to the Path menu and I'm going to select Union. So if I do not do that, if I had text that had some connecting features like a script font, if I had a cutting machine, it would cut out each character individually, including the little connector, and then you'd have a lot of letters to actually paste on your paper. Whereas if I break them apart or ungroup them and then use the union command under the Path menu, now when it either embroiders this and or cuts this, it will cut it out as one particular unit and not as individual characters, right? Now that's an important thing to keep in mind, especially when you are working with script fonts. Won't make so much here with the serif fonts or sans serif fonts, but with fonts that have feet or connecting capabilities, it will make a huge difference. So that's why I'm bringing it up at this point. So I have the top of my circle all set up. So it says I drive fast. Now down below here, I want to type the text and barefoot. So I drive fast and barefoot. But I want the text not to be on the outside of the circle, but I would like the text to be on the inside of the circle. Let me just pull over here a graphic of actually what we're trying to create. So I have my circle that I've worked with. I have my text here, I drive fast, and under here I want to have the text curve on the inside of the circle and barefoot. So here's the outside text. On the bottom here, whenever you work with text that's on the bottom of the circle, we're going to go ahead and enlarge this circle a little bit. So let me just, in this case, duplicate this circle. Again, if we right click, we can actually use the duplicate command, but the shortcut key, I love shortcuts, is Control D. So I have the circle selected. I'm simply going to press Control D, and I'm going to go ahead and hold my Shift key down and select the red, just so that you can see that I actually have two different circles here. Okay, so Control Z will bring that back, and I want to enlarge the red circle. So I'm going to hold my Control and Shift key down on my keyboard, and as I click and drag, I'm going to enlarge that circle so it's just large enough to go beyond the top of I drive fast, because I want this text at the bottom of the circle to fit on the inside of this red circle following that slope here, so it almost looks like it's sitting in a donut, right? So let's go ahead once again and select our font tool, click on the workspace, and we already can see that it kept the text or the font that we used before. So all we need to do is type and barefoot. So I drive fast and barefoot. Go to the selection tool, and again I want to place this text along this red path. So I'm going to hold my Shift key down and click on that red path, and when I do that, because and barefoot was selected, I hold the Shift key down. Now the red circle is selected. I would like to attach this text to this path. So if we go to the text menu, select Put on Path, it places on the path, but look exactly where it put it. It placed that text on the outside of the circle. So what are we going to do? If I deselect everything and I select just the red circle at this point, the outside circle, I can come up here to my flip tools. So I can either flip vertically or horizontally. And I would like to flip that horizontally, I believe. This one here is flip it vertically. I'm sorry, if I flip it vertically, what that will do is vertically flip that text around the circle itself. And you can see now that it's inside of the circle down below. And if I select the circle again, I get the rotation handles for the circle, okay? Because I want to rotate the circle, not the text. The text is attached to that circle. So I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this text. Once again, click and drag from that ruler up on top, and I'm going to go ahead and drag this guideline down here so I can kind of get that centered exactly where I want it to be. And in this case now, I'm going to go ahead and select the text. And if I double click on that, I should get the text tool, and I can select all of the text and increase the size of that font. So let's change that back to 28 because that was the size of the font up here. As well as having the font selected or the words selected, I can increase the spacing of my words and letters to where I would like them visually to be. Click on my select tool, and once again I would like to click on the circle. The second time gives me the rotation handles, not the sizing handles, and I can click and drag to rotate that to where I would like those words to be. And if I move my guideline down below, I can again select the rotation tool and get that text to be placed exactly where I want it to be. Now we have a problem, all right, because now everything here looks great, but I don't want this circle anymore. If I click on that circle and I press the delete key, what you have done is you have erased the path for that text to be on. All right, so we're missing a step, a very important step in the process of keeping the text on the path. So if I press Control Z on my keyboard, and this time I select my text, once again, if I go to Path, I select Object to Path. Now I have converted this text to an actual object. It's not on this path anymore. So if I go ahead and move that circle out of the way, and I converted that I drive fast text to a path earlier, all right, so that's what will keep it on its circular path. But I'm not quite done yet. So I reselect my text. I'm going to ungroup my text now that I've converted it to a path, and then I'm going to go back to Path and select Union. So each individual character now is one welded or grouped set of characters so that it will actually either digitize and or cut it out uniformly in one swoop. So why is that important? Let me just review again. Let me select this circle. I don't need that one anymore, and I press delete. Let's say, for example, this circle was in here, and if I did not select path and then union for these particular letters, if I were taking this to the cutting machine, it may cut out the letter A and then come up here and select and cut out the circle and then come back and finish the rest of the letters. All right. By selecting path and union, it treats it as one unit. So iDrive Fast will cut out or digitize itself. The circle will cut out or digitize by itself, and or the and barefoot will cut out and digitize as an entire unit. So I'm not skipping all over the page up to the R, down to the O, back up to the I, down to the D, and have it be skipping all over to cut things out or to digitize. It will do this in a uniform fashion. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and keep this circle because that's going to be part of the patch that I'm creating. So if I click on that and actually before I do that, let me go ahead and draw a imaginary box around both the text. And you can see that they're both selected. I want to go ahead and go over to the Align and Distribute menu and center them on their vertical axis. All right, so now these are perfectly centered around themselves. Then I can also group them together. So I could either go up to the Properties menu up here and group the selected objects together, or you can see in the tooltip that pops up, pressing Control G. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Control G has now grouped these together, and you can see that they're one unit. So if I click and drag, they will move together. And then if I press Control Z, they will go back together. What I want to do is center this circle with this text. Now if I select the text, and then I hold my Shift key down on my keyboard and I click on the circle, because I have last selected over here in my Align and Distribute Properties window, the last thing I have selected, the items I selected previously will align to the last item selected. So this text here will align to the circle. And if I center them vertically, and then I also center them horizontally, now the text is perfectly placed around that circle. Once again, let me get rid of this guideline, and to do that, if I place my mouse pointer over that line, it will turn red. When it is red, I can select the Delete key on my keyboard, and that will erase it. Now, since the text is centered perfectly around this circle, I would like to increase this circle to include the text itself, so I can make a patch. And if I hold the Control and Shift key on my keyboard while I click and drag, this circle will maintain its proportion and be concentric because I have the Control and Shift key selected. And then I can size that now, and you can see it maintains kind of the shape of that curvature because I've based my text off of that path previously. So ultimately, when we're done, again, what we're going to do is we're going to have this, cut out. The I drive fast. The thing that's missing is the sewing machine clip art that's in the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to use the Import command. If I said New, everything I've created here is going to be gone. But if I select Import, it will import an image into this particular design. So let me go to my desktop, and under Tutorial Samples, I should have the sewing machine here. Let's take a look. Sewing machine SVG. So there is the graphic that I want to place in the circle. I select OK, and then I can actually size this where I want it. Now, I don't know if this is centered perfectly in my circle or not. So the easiest way to do that is to simply select the sewing machine, and because I have last selected in my Align and Distribute, and if I select the sewing machine and then the last thing I select is the circle, it's going to align the sewing machine to the circle. So I simply come over here and center it vertically, and I center it horizontally. So now that sewing machine, if I deselect everything, that sewing machine is centered perfectly in that circle. And let's say I would like that a little bit larger. So selecting that sewing machine, I think you're catching on, holding Control and Shift will size that sewing machine out when I have the sizing handles from the center out. And let me just, for fun, let me just go ahead and change the color of that sewing machine to more of a blue-green. All right, I'll change this text here to a dark blue-green, and that looks great. All right, so here we have a basic patch, or you could, print this out and cut it on your cutting machine, and you can make yourself little stickers, whatever you would like to do. Everything has been converted. Let's check this circle here. Is it a circle or is it a path? If I come down here to the status line, it says it's a circle. So I actually need to change and convert this to an object. So I simply go to Path, Object to Path, and now when I click on it, it says a path of 4 nodes. So the nodes that will be visible here, if I click on the Nodes tool, here are the 4 nodes that are there. So I have the capability of sizing or changing my circle later on, all right? But I don't need to do that. So let's go ahead and go back to the selection tool. But I was just showing you that that's what it means. So when you select here and it says it's a path of 4 nodes, how do you know? Well, you click on the Nodes tool and it will show you exactly what it is. So here's my object, right? So this is what I want to convert into an embroidery design. But if I didn't want an embroidery design and wanted to make stickers, simply, you can group this together, size it however you want to size it for your stickers, and then save it as an SVG file. So let's go to File, Save As, and I'm going to go ahead and call this I Drive Fast. And when I type that in, I'm going to click on this down arrow here for Save As Type, and I'm going to go ahead and choose Plain SVG. That gives me the capability to actually import it into the Cricut software, the Silhouette software, or even the embroidery software, so I can create an embroidery design very, very easily. I'm going to go ahead and say Save. All right, and just for grins, let me select this object, and it's telling me right now that the width is 5.694 and the height is 5.694. If I grab the sizing tool here and I press the Control-Shift key on my keyboard, I can, because it's a vector now, it's an object, I can increase or decrease the size of the object, or even better yet, I can come up to the toolbar here and lock that padlock. And if I want this to be exactly 3.75 inches. Because this padlock is locked, it will change the width and the height proportionally. So I'll type in 3.75, hit my enter key, and now the width and height have changed proportionally, and I now have the size I would like personally to go ahead and create my embroidered patch. All right, so let's go ahead and go to our embroidery software and see how this very simple design can be very quickly converted to an embroidery design. Before I bring this design over into the Drawings X Pro software, you can see I have the black circle here on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and change some of these colors to be very similar to this sample that I have created here. So I'm going to go ahead and change the outline to more of a dark olive color along with the text, and change the other items into a different color green. So this will give you a little insight on how to create the appliques. So I want to have a specific fabric color here. So if I go over to the greens here, I can choose a light green, and when I click on it, it will actually fill that object with that color, which is going to be the fabric, which is wonderful. The outline itself is still black, but I would rather have a dark green background. So if I hold my Shift key on my keyboard and then select a color, you can see down here on the status line, again, the status bar is very important. It tells you actually everything you need to know. It tells me my fill color is this here, and the stroke is this dark olive green. I also want to show you, because I haven't shown you this in a tutorial yet, how to widen the stroke that is around this object, and the stroke is considered to be an outline. If we go to the Fill and Strokes Properties window, there is a Stroke Style tab that when we click on it, it will give us the actual size of our stroke. And pixels is a screen measurement, and I'm just going to go ahead and leave that and then click on the up arrow, and when I do that you can see that it's changing the thickness of the outside border. It won't matter when I bring this into the digitizing software because I'll be able to change the width of this line, but visually here maybe I want it to be a little bit wider, because if I do print a sticker or I want to print this and cut this on my cutting machine, it's nicer to have a nice thicker border. So we can, change that to whatever we want. So let's just change that to 4.5. I will press the Enter key and I have a nice stroke or outline around that object. The sewing machine, let's go ahead and change that into a medium type green. So if I just click on it, it will fill that object. Let's see if I have something here a little different. Yeah, that looks pretty good right there. So when I click on the palettes here, it's going to fill the object with a color. And then if I shift click on the items here in the palette, the shift click will actually give it an outline. So I don't really want an outline here on the screen, but just to show you how this works, if I do press shift and then click on this dark green, you can see that it put a very light, very thin, let me go ahead and zoom on this by holding my control key and then turning the scroll wheel on the mouse. You can see it did put an outline around that object. So that would be something, you can personally choose. If I want to remove that outline, what I need to do is go back to my palette here, slide my scroll bar all the way to the left, and because I added the stroke or the outline with the shift key, I'm going to hold the shift key down on my keyboard while I click the X to remove that outline, and now you can see that that outline is removed. And also, if I select the I Drive Fast and Barefoot, it's because they are grouped together. I can scroll back over to the greens and select this dark olive color by just selecting it. All right, so now I have very quickly created, the inner color of my object. I've colored the sewing machine and I've added an outline. So let me just resave this design. I'm going to save it as a plain SVG. I'm going to continue to give it the same file name, I Drive Fast. Click on Save. And since I saved it before, I will go ahead and replace this. And then I will go ahead and open up the digitizing software and then load that particular graphic vector file into the digitizing software. Okay, I've opened up my Drawings X Pro software and I want to create a new embroidery design. So I simply click on Create New. As in Inkscape, I simply go to File, Import, from File, and here's my I Drive Fast SVG file. So I'll select it and then click on Open, and very quickly it's brought in this design and digitized it. Automatically it converted that vector file into an embroidery file, but there's a couple things I might want to change. So for example, I would really like to have this background here be applique fabric so that then the stitching on top of this sewing machine will stitch and the letters will stitch, and I would like a thicker border. So to do that, first thing you need to do when you have this software, and this software is available on my website at www.SewingScene.com, and having classes here like this, tutorials, it makes it really nice to show you how to use the software. So it's nice to have that support. So if I right click on this design, the first thing I want to do is go ahead and break it apart. Then I'm also going to right click again and then ungroup the design. When I click off of it and reselect it, I can now go to the properties window and tell it I would like the circle that I have selected to be an applique. And when I do that, you can very quickly see that it converted that filled background to fabric, right? So if I click and scroll just like I do in Inkscape, you can see now I have my applique fabric there. Now this outline is a running stitch, and I really would like that to be a satin stitch. So if I select that particular object, once again, if I go to my outline menu in the properties, I can tell it that I don't want a running stitch. I would like it to be a serial or satin serial stitch. So I simply select that, and with a click of a mouse, now I have a nice satin serial stitch around the outside of that design. I would like it to be a little bit wider, so I can change the outline width. So simply go over here and I can just scroll this or type in the value I'd like it to be, and let's just go ahead and take it up to 3.5. Okay, 3.5 millimeters. That gives me a really nice thick satin stitch around the outside. And I click on that again, and you can see this pink circle. This is the actual cut line. So if I had this cut on my cutting machine, this is the outside of that particular design. Or this is where you would stop your embroidery machine, take your trimming scissors and trim close to the design. So if you have the option to use a cutting machine, you're going to get a cleaner cut, and once the software places the placement stitch on the design or the fabric that you're creating this on, for example, if you want to put this on a tote bag, it will stitch the placement stitch, and then you simply place your fabric circle on that circle that it's stitched. It makes it really nice. But I'm pretty particular, and I like to really have more of my satin stitch on the patch and have less of it off the edge, because with a cutting machine, I'm going to have such a clean edge that I don't need that extra overhang. So that's called offset. And here's offset right here. So under outline, here's my offset. It's currently set to nothing. And if I change this offset, and as I'm slowly moving it, you can see on the screen that that offset at a -7 or 6 or 7, a -6 or 7, let me just bring that into -0.5 millimeters. I have more of my stitch now on the inside of my patch and less hanging over the edge. So I'm going to have a more secure embroidery on my project, right? And any fabric here that would be fraying is going to be covered up, and that will not fall apart. So many embroidery designs that have an applique edge, they end up pulling away from the fabric because the satin stitch is not on the fabric far enough, right? So you have control of that with this X Pro version of the software. And then the next thing I want to take a look at is, if you take a look at the sequence here, this sewing machine is cut out from this fabric background. I do not want this background cut out. I want a solid circle that I can actually embroider on. So if I select the sewing machine here, all right, and it will select the sewing machine here on the screen. You have the capability to turn the overlaps off or remove overlaps. So if I say never, you can see now that this sewing machine that was here in the center, let me press Control Z so I can undo that. This sewing machine cutout, all right, if I change this to never, it will never cut that sewing machine out of the fabric in the center, and it will just place this embroidery on top of it, and that's exactly what I want. The fonts are perfectly set the way they are right now. If I scroll in here a little bit closer, I want to show you something I like about the Pro version instead of the creative drawings. If I select the fonts or the text on the screen, so let me just control and zoom to scroll back out. If I select all this text and hold my shift key down and select all this text, I can right click on this and I can combine the text together. So it will stitch all the letters at one given time. This is the jump stitch. It's only showing it on the screen, but if you have an embroidery machine that will cut these jump stitches for you automatically, that will be taken care of. But if I, again, scroll back in here by holding the control on the keyboard and using the scroll button on my mouse, I may want to make that font just a little bit more dense. So if I click on it, I can come over here to the density and I can actually change that to a 0.30. And if I click off of this, you can see the fonts are filled in a lot nicer, right? And the last thing I would like to do to finish this particular design off, a couple things. All right, let's get into some really cool stuff here. If I select this sewing machine, right now if I look at the sewing machine, there is no outline around that design. And I'd like to have a really finished look to this sewing machine. So I'm going to select that sewing machine and I'm going to go back to my outline tab across the top of the screen, and you can see there are no properties for an outline because no outline has been permitted. So all I need to do is click on running, and it had placed a running stitch. Let me go ahead and zoom in here. Really nice. You can see it has placed this running stitch around the design. But here is the beautiful power of this software. I can change the length of that running stitch to 2.0, right? And I can also change the type of stitch it is. So right now it's just doing a single stitch, outline stitch around the object. If I select on stitches here and choose double, it will create a beautiful, let me zoom out of here, click off the object and then click and drag to zoom in. You can see how nicely it has created a double outline stitch around it, and it's automatically taken in the compensation and pull compensation settings. So this outline, when stabilized appropriately with a lightweight stabilizer, is going to stitch absolutely perfect. I mean, how do I know that? If I look and zoom in right here, you can see this outline, right, is overlapping those stitches, and it is automatically taking care of the pull compensation of this particular design. The last thing I'd like to show you is maybe this outline for me is just a little too thick. All right, I don't want too much of a buildup. I'd like a nice light satin stitch around the edge of this applique. Currently there are 10,800 stitches roughly to this particular design. So if I select that outline, I can change the density of that to, maybe I'll type in a 0.55, press my enter key, and you can see that there is a little bit of a lighter applique stitch, satin stitch around that design, which can actually be very, very pretty. And the last thing I want to do is add an underlay. So if I add this cross underlay, because there's lots of different types of underlay here, If I select this cross underlay, it will put a layer of stitches under there and then put the satin stitches on top. It will be a nice, secure, professional looking design, right? So let me go ahead and zoom out, click off this design, and again, this is what it's going to look like. And if I just go ahead, just for demonstration's sake here, and I tell this to break apart, this is going to remove the jump stitches on the screen here so I can see how this design is going to look when it stitches out on my embroidery machine. So let's take a look at how this will actually look and stitch out using the slow redraw feature in Drawings X Pro. I will go ahead and click on that, and here's our start button, but I'm going to go ahead and increase my speed here to 4,000 revolutions per minute so that it stitches through the design a little bit quicker. So when I click on this start button, you'll see what it will do is put down the placement stitch. It moves the hoop out of the way so you can actually place your fabric on there, and then it puts a tack down stitch and the underlay. It goes back and does the nice satin stitch around the edge of the design, and I'll just jump ahead here quickly so you can see that. Once the outline is done, it goes ahead and stitches the sewing machine. All right, and we can go through here quickly, just kind of see how it jumps through the design. Oh, it's stitching out beautifully. And then it will go through and do the double stitch outline at the end, and then finally it will do the fonts and the wording. You can see it puts a nice little underlay stitch, and the fonts are actually a little bit heavier because we increased the density. So a very straightforward, easy program to use. It's kind of like Inkscape, just kind of point and click, and it makes it work. There's no digitizing involved. It's just simply a vector to embroidery conversion software. This also has the capability to go directly to a cutting machine or use rhinestones also with it. So as we go through and learn tutorials, down the road you're going to learn a lot more fun things to do with Inkscape and marry it with Drawings X Pro software. So I hope you enjoyed learning something new, kind of venture out a little bit. My name again is Katie Bartz, and I'm at www.SewingScene.com. Please visit my website, look at the different products I have, the different designs and patterns, as well as subscribing to the channel. Subscribing just makes it more motivating for me to continue educating you and creating these free tutorials. So reach out if you have any questions, but until then, happy sewing.